Good evening. Over in Boston, a certain school district is facing a federal lawsuit because parents there are saying that their students were discriminated against. How exactly? Well, according to the lawsuit, the school district was holding racially segregated events wherein certain students were invited, but white students were specifically excluded. Likewise, this is not only happening in Boston, because in order to fight injustice, a high school accounting program right here in the state of New York, they also made a point to exclude white students from being allowed to join. Meanwhile, as states across the entire country are firing their police officers because they refuse to get the vaccine, the state of Florida is taking a slightly different approach. That's because just yesterday, Governor Ron DeSantis announced that he's working on a new piece of legislation that would actually give a $5,000 bonus to any unvaccinated police officer who leaves their state and goes over to Florida to work. Let's go through it all together. This is your daily Facts Matter update, and I'm your host, Roman, from the Epoch Times. And now let's begin today's discussion over in Boston, where a certain school district is fighting supposed racism with a different type of racism. That's right, 3 families there have filed a federal lawsuit against the Wellesley Public School District because they claimed that the school violated the constitutional rights of their students. How exactly? Well, according to this lawsuit, the Wellesley Public School District held racially segregated events for their students, specifically events that white kids were not invited to. So if you were a white student in the school district, you were excluded from attending these events. Furthermore, these students were racially segregated into what are known as affinity groups, and the school imposed a speech code, which this lawsuit alleges violated the students' First Amendment rights. Now, the public school district, by the way, that's in question here is called Wellesley. It's a suburb of Boston, and they have in total 4,700 students that are spread out across 1 preschool, 7 elementary schools, 1 middle school, as well as 1 high school. And according to this lawsuit, under the guise of racial equity, this is what it says, quote, WPS sponsors and organizes racial affinity group meetings that welcome some students but exclude others based solely on the races and ethnicities of the students involved. Now, it's worth mentioning that the action that the school district is taking does not appear to be haphazard. This does not appear to be the work of some rogue teachers. Instead, this appears to be exactly in line with the school district's stated goal. That's because last year in 2020, the Wellesley Public School District, they released what they called a 5-year equity strategic plan. And in that plan, they wrote that their goal is to, quote, pursue justice for historically marginalized communities, continuously examine systems of privilege and bias, work collectively to disrupt and dismantle inequity in all its forms, and achieve racial equity. And then, in order to accomplish this very high-minded goal, the school district created what they called affinity spaces for students with shared identity in order to nurture and affirm positive racial identity development. And so, under what the district called its new racial affinity group policy, they officially created both racial affinity groups as well as racial affinity spaces. And you might be wondering, what exactly does that even mean? What is a racial affinity group? Well, here is how the school district describes it, quote, it's an opportunity for people within an identity group to openly share their experiences without the risk of feeling like they will offend someone from another group and without another group's voices. However, the lawsuit that is being filed against the school district, it claims that this policy is inherently exclusionary. To be precise, the lawsuit describes how the school, quote, held racially segregated events for students where certain students were invited, but white students were specifically excluded. Furthermore, the lawsuit states that this type of policy is clearly illegal, given the fact that nearly 70 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court established a precedent which says that, quote, public schools cannot segregate students by race, and students do not abandon their First Amendment rights at the schoolhouse gate. And speaking of the First Amendment rights, this lawsuit further alleges that the school district suppressed the First Amendment rights of their students. And they do so by punishing the students whose speech they deem to be biased, which includes, among many other things, speech that the school district considers, and this is a quote, offensive, has an impact on others, treats another person differently, or demonstrates conscious or unconscious bias. And cited in this lawsuit, among several other examples, was one instance where students were told that the phrase Blue Lives Matter was associated with white supremacy and therefore it should not be uttered on school grounds. Furthermore, this lawsuit actually contains quite a few stories of how these policies play out in the real world. Here are just a few examples. One child was said to have been held by a teacher after class because the child mentioned that their parent was conservative. The teacher lectured the student about why the parent's views should change. Another student was reported to have been physically assaulted in a school hallway by their classmates after the assailants discovered that their parent had voted for Donald Trump in the presidential election. A guidance counselor is said to have dismissed the child's concerns because the perpetrators were minority students. Now, the three families in this case are being represented by a nonprofit called Parents Defending Education. And here's how this group's president described the situation that's happening over in Boston. This is not how public schools that operate with public tax dollars should be conducting themselves. It is fundamentally un-American to discriminate against students or separate students, segregate students, treat them differently on the basis of race. It's un-American and it's also unconstitutional. Now, the lawsuit that they filed is asking the judge to immediately stop the Wellesley School District from being able to enforce these types of policies. And we here at the Epoch Times, we reached out to the school district for comment on this case, but we have yet to hear back. And so we'll just have to wait and see how this all plays out in court. Although, frankly, if you have been following the news over, let's say, the past year or so, then you likely know that what's happening over in this Wellesley School District over in Boston is far from the only instance of public institutions using racism to fight supposed racism. For instance, just a few months ago, it was revealed that a high school accounting program right here in the state of New York was not allowing white students to apply. Let me just repeat that. An accounting program for high school students right here in the state of New York was explicitly excluding white students. Specifically, what happened was that several universities here in New York partnered up with the New York State Society of Certified Public Accountants, and they held a summer accounting program for what they called underrepresented high school students. And that program, it included virtual sessions about forensic accounting, interviewing skills, public speaking, networking, as well as an accounting professional overview featuring a panel discussion with experts in the profession. However, you know what the program did not include? Any white students. That's because when a student would go online to apply for this program, the only checkboxes available were Hispanic, Black, Asian, or Native American. There was no option for white students to apply. Although, frankly, we know that in the past that has not stopped everyone from trying. Now, the big question is whether this type of program was actually legal or not. And according to Mr. Hans Bader, who is a civil rights attorney, he said that since this program was hosted by public institutions that receive federal funding, well, then the program would likely have been in violation of both the U.S. Constitution as well as Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Here's specifically what he said. If the New York program were challenged, I would expect that the New York regional office would find it illegal under Title VI unless there is meddling by political appointees in Washington to prevent such a ruling from being issued. A complete bar against whites is not valid under a diversity rationale, although considering race as one of the many factors might well be. Regardless, if you would like to read more about either this accounting program here in New York or about what's happening over in the Boston School District, I'll throw all that into the description box below this video so you can go deeper into it for yourself. And all I ask in return is that you take a quick moment, no matter what race you are, to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm, which forces the algorithm to share this video out to potentially thousands of more people, letting the truth be known far and wide. And now let's move on over and discuss the new vaccine travel requirements for those who are flying on airplanes. Oh, sorry, what's this? Well, that's a great question, Roman, and it is today's sponsor, which is an awesome messaging and email service provider called Secure. And it's awesome if you're the type of person that actually cares about their privacy. Because, I mean, it's no big secret that these big tech companies are mining and remining our data all the time. In fact, in the year 2020, it was found that over 155 million Americans, likely including you and me, have suffered some form of data breach. And by the way, that's only what's publicly known. However, what's happened in the past, well, that can stay in the past because with Secure, your data and your messages can remain private. And that's because Secure has all of their data centers located over in Switzerland rather than in the US or in China. And the reason that's so important is that Switzerland has some of the strictest data privacy laws in the entire world, and they are not subject to the Intrusive Cloud Act. And if you want to know what the Cloud Act is, head on over to secure.com and watch their video on the homepage or on the video tutorials page, which is under their support section. Now, the thing that I personally love the most about the Secure app is the privacy aspect of it. They don't mine my data. They don't mine my phone number. They don't mine the phone numbers or data of my friends and family who I chat with. But best of all is that if your friends and family don't actually use the secure app themselves, it doesn't matter. Because the way that it works is that when you use their secure send email technology, all of your emails and your messages route to Switzerland, and then the recipient can reply using their secure reply technology. And so everything remains private no matter what. And the same actually goes for their messaging app as well. And they're always coming up with new features. In fact, the most recent one they told me about, they sent me an email here, was that they're coming up with a new feature called text to chat by invite. So they're an innovative company and they really do care about your privacy. And so what they're doing doesn't work with your existing big tech email account. So check them out. You can head on over to secure.com. I'll throw the link into the description box below. And when you use promo code Roman, you can get 25% off. And the rates are not even that expensive to start with, by the way. It's only $5 for the messenger and $10 for the email and messenger combo. And they even offer a 7-day free trial. So head on over to their website. Again, it'll be linked in the description box below. Use promo code Roman to save some money. And now Roman in the studio, back to you. And now let's move on over and talk about traveling. Just yesterday, the Biden administration rolled out new guidelines for all international travelers who are flying into the United States. And according to a senior official within the administration, starting on November the 8th, so about 2 weeks from now, the CDC will put into place 3 new rules. Let's go through them together. The first rule will be that all non-U.S. citizens who are traveling into America, who are not immigrants, must be fully vaccinated against COVID, and they must be able to provide proof of vaccination status prior to boarding their flight. The second rule from the CDC will require that all fully vaccinated travelers coming into the United States must still show a negative COVID test within 3 days of their flight's departure. And this rule, by the way, applies to both U.S. citizens as well as non-citizens, meaning that regardless of whether you are vaccinated or not, you will still have to show a negative COVID test if you'd like to come back into the United States. And then the third rule from the CDC will require that all travelers must provide their contact information to their airlines before boarding their flights into the U.S. And this is done, by the way, in theory so that they can be contact traced, although quite frankly, given the fact that when you travel internationally, the airline already has most of your information, such as your birth date, your full name, your email address, your phone number, and so it's not exactly clear what other information they would need from you. Regardless, these are the 3 new rules for international travelers who are coming into the United States by plane. However, in terms of the people who are coming illegally across the U.S. southern border, they are not actually covered by these new CDC rules. They are, to this day, still allowed to come into this country with or without having gotten the vaccine. And how do we know this exactly? Well, just listen to this exchange between Peter Doocy from Fox News and the White House press secretary, Ms. Jen Psaki, and notice that she confirms this case to be true, but she does not offer an explanation.
Requirement for people at a business with more than 100 people, it is not a requirement for migrants at the southern border. Why?
That's correct. Go ahead.
Now, that exchange was from about 2 weeks ago, but thus far there are no new developments regarding illegal immigrants who are crossing the U.S. southern border. However, getting back to the issue of airplanes, thus far there are no requirements for Americans who are flying domestically. However, over the past several weeks, White House officials have, on multiple occasions, said that nothing is off the table in regards to requiring the COVID vaccine for domestic flight for American citizens. And so we'll just have to wait and see whether such a thing is implemented. If you'd like to read more about these new CDC guidelines, which are about to go into effect in about 2 weeks, I'll throw them into the description box below this video for you to check out. And again, all I ask in return is that if you haven't already, take a quick moment to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. However, since we're discussing the topic of vaccine mandates, let's move on over to Florida. Now, as you probably already know, many states across the entire country right now are currently in the process of firing their police officers if they fail to take the COVID vaccine. However, the state of Florida is taking a completely different approach. That's because just yesterday, Governor Ron DeSantis announced that he's working on a new piece of legislation that would actually give a $5,000 bonus to unvaccinated police officers who leave their states and come to work in Florida. Specifically, during an interview on Fox News, Governor Ron DeSantis said that he's actively working to recruit out-of-state police officers who have either been fired or placed on unpaid leave to leave their state and come to work in Florida. Here's specifically what he said. We're actually actively working to recruit out-of-state law enforcement because we do have needs in our police and our sheriff's departments. So in the next legislative session, I'm going to hopefully sign legislation that gives a $5,000 bonus to any out-of-state law enforcement that relocates in Florida. So NYPD, Minneapolis, Seattle, if you're not being treated well, we will treat you better here. You can fill important needs for us and we will compensate you as a result. In that same interview, by the way, Governor Ron DeSantis said that Joe Biden's vaccine mandates are unconstitutional and that he believes they will wreak havoc on the American economy. Here's what he said on that front. It will wreak havoc on the economy because even if a small percentage of these folks end up losing their jobs or voluntarily walking away, you're going to have huge disruptions in medical, in logistics, and law enforcement. Now, if you'd like to read more about the details of this new proposed policy over in Florida, I'll throw the link to it into the description box below this video for you to check out. However, let's stay on the topic of vaccine mandates and head on over to California. 2 days ago, a man drove his SUV into a crowd of people who were gathered to protest against vaccine mandates over in Southern California. Let me just repeat that. Even though you really don't hear much about them on national TV, there are anti-vaccine mandate protests that are springing up across the entire country right now. And 2 days ago, in a city called Palmdale, which is located in the southern region of California, a man drove his car into these protesters and he injured a woman who was in her 40s. Now, the driver was identified by the police as Mr. William Aslakson, and according to witnesses who were there on site, he had an argument with the protesters, left the rally, got into his Jeep Wrangler, and then drove it onto the sidewalk, hitting a woman and then fleeing the scene. Here's specifically how a local deputy described what happened in a statement. A witness stated a man disagreed with the protest, entered his vehicle, and intentionally drove toward the protesters. The suspect then drove away westbound and out of view. Then, after driving away, the man was eventually arrested about an hour and a half later, and according to the inmate records in that city, he was booked into the local jail on suspicion of felony assault and is currently being held there in lieu of a $50,000 bail. Furthermore, according to that deputy's statement, the woman who was injured, she was in her 40s, and she was taken to a local hospital because of her injuries that were thankfully not life-threatening. If you'd like to read more about what happened over in this assault, I'll throw the link to the police report into the description box below this video so you can get deeper into it yourself. Now that you've completed this episode of Facts Matter, I would highly recommend that you move on over to Epoch TV and check out an awesome episode of Counterculture with Danielle D'Souza Gill, where she sat down and interviewed Mr. David Horowitz, and together they exposed the BLM organization, specifically their mission statement and the carnage that they have wreaked throughout the summer of 2020. Here's a trailer for that awesome episode.
All right, this is getting serious. Oh my goodness. That would look like that's justice. That's how they want it.
It's an evil movement. It's about hating America and wanting to destroy it.
It's incredibly evil for these organizations to attempt to dismantle the family unit, particularly the Black family unit, because all this does is harm the children.
These riots were the largest eruptions of civic violence in the history of our country.
All we heard was further agitation, further screaming, the sound of windows breaking, the noise from the streets. God help you if you were a store owner or a clerk at the front desk of an establishment that was vandalized and ransacked.
We have a racist administration in the White House. Was there a racial element in the death of George Floyd? And his answer was, we couldn't find one.
If you want to check out that full episode, as well as all the other phenomenal content that you can find over on Epoch TV, I'll throw a link to it. It'll be right there at the very top of the description box. I hope you click on it. I hope you check it out. I hope you subscribe. And I hope that you join us on this journey of exploring this beautiful, beautiful world through honest journalism that is based in truth and tradition. Now, lastly, if you haven't already, smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already, in order to get this type of honest news content delivered directly into your YouTube feed while YouTube still allows it. Also, consider hitting that notification bell so you can actually be notified of any new videos as we release them. And lastly, if you have an Instagram account, consider following me at Epoch Times Roman. I publish behind-the-scenes research as well as spicy memes. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed and stay free.